Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. I'm gonna have to do kind of a standing video with the mic this time because it's just raining so hard that it's just not feasible for me to do this sitting. It's too close to an area where the rain is just really loud, so I'm gonna do it standing. Let's see, 3 questions. Looking at them for the first time. I don't drink, but my boyfriend cooks with wine and says it's no problem. Is it? Yes, it almost certainly is. It's not really a big deal. And the reason for that is alcohol evaporates at a relatively low temperature. And for this reason, it's actually one of the same reasons why they have the angel share when they make distilled drinks, because alcohol is constantly evaporating if it's able to escape from its container. And so a lot of it ends up evaporating during the distillation process, and what evaporates is called the angel share. Well, if you cook alcohol at any temperature that you cook just about anything, it's going to evaporate. And there might still be trace amounts, but it's really not enough to have any effect on you. I mean, if you're going to gauge things by that amount, by that degree, what is going on? Is the computer just kind of falling over? Anyway, if you're going to gauge things by that degree, you wouldn't want to eat bread or drink juice either, because juice and bread both contain trace amounts of alcohol. So does food that's been cooked with wine or even spirits. You can absolutely have bananas Foster if you're a Mormon or a Muslim. Some people might disagree with that, but if they do, it's because they don't understand that the alcohol is such a small amount that it's completely negligible. So yeah, that answers the question, I hope. Let's see. What does it mean by watch your macros? That's kind of funny. That ties in a little bit with the first one because, well, I'll get to it. There are 2 things that are sort of the cornerstones of nutrition nowadays, and there are other factors. I'm not trying to limit dietetics to 2 things. I'm just saying there's 2 big things, and that's calories and macros. There's also micros, and there's other things, but the 2 big things are calories and macros. Calories are the units of energy that we measure in food, and if you consume too many, then you gain weight, and if you consume less than ideal, then you lose weight. And if you consume within a window that you're supposed to, you maintain weight. And it's really that simple. I mean, gosh, my camera's really acting up. I'm sorry that I'm doing a standing video, but I have to. There's just too much distortion from the rain. I mean, it's nuts. The thunder rattled my car earlier. The second nutritional component is macros. And there are 3 macros when you talk to people, but there's actually 4, and that's where I'm going into the previous question. The big 3, though, the 3 that you really need to think about are carbohydrates, which include sugars. Sugars are just simple carbohydrates, or you could argue the reverse, that carbohydrates are complicated sugars, and proteins and lipids, which are also sometimes called fats, which scares people, even though it absolutely shouldn't, because fats are very important. All of them are important. You should even get a few saturated fats in my opinion, for starters, especially if you're a dude, because it's used to make testosterone. But when people say watch your macros, what they mean is if you're struggling to gain muscle or lose weight or maintain weight, and you're being very cautious with calories, then it stands to reason that the problem are your macros. They're off. You're consuming too many carbs or too many fats, probably not too many proteins. It's pretty hard for that to mess with you, but it's possible. And so you need to rearrange that metric, that proportion. Interestingly enough, there's a 4th macro. It's alcohol. Alcohol is the most calorie dense of all the macros. In fact, the only one we can consume in reasonable amounts is ethanol. Like when people say alcohol, they actually mean ethanol when they're talking about drinking or using it in cooking, for example. But really, there's a whole bunch of different kinds, and they're very, very, very calorie dense. In fact, for example, octane, that's an alcohol, and your car runs on it. It'll kill you if you drink it, but it has tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, I think it's tens of thousands, of calories per ounce, which makes sense So it's funny to think that your car kind of runs on calories the same way you do. Because I mean, a calorie, like I said, it's just a unit of energy. It's not like some magic thing that only works in biological systems. But yeah, lipids are important because they play a pivotal role in cellular function. In fact, your cells are actually the cell wall, or not walls, cell membranes. They're made out of a phospholipid bilayer. So, lipid, key word there, because lipids repel water. You know, think about water and oil. Oil is a lipid. The only difference, by the way, between a fat and an oil is how it is at room temperature, which is why I'm a little annoyed by the marketing term coconut oil. In my place, it's solid at room temperature, so I think it qualifies coconut fat. But I know that's a little bit more debatable because, like, I think it's like 82 degrees that it melts, something like that. I don't remember. Anyway, and then and then there's carbs, which consuming large quantities of sugar is going to cause a person to put on fat, even if they're below their caloric intake. Carbohydrates, great for long-term energy. Sugar, good for short-term energy. And then lastly, there's proteins, which are really important in like cellular synthesis, creation of muscle, things like that. So it's good to get a proper balance of all three of those. Alcohol is the only one that you don't need. And like I said, ethanol is the only one we can consume within a reasonable amount. Methanol, in fact, is in trace amounts in really, really bad, like bottom shelf booze, and that's what makes people really sick the next day. It's actually poisoning from methanol. Very important. I realized the way that ran together. It might have sounded like I was saying ethanol. So it's completely unnecessary. It's really not good for you as a macro. I'm not saying don't ever drink. I'm just saying it's the only one that's not necessary. It's the most calorie dense, and it's not very healthy. So that's what they mean by watch your macros. They're talking about proteins, carbs, which include sugars, which are more sparingly used, and fats, lipids. Oh, did I say fats? Proteins, whatever. You know what I said. I said all three. Okay, let's see. What do you think of fate? Wow. That's kind of harder to answer. It's always the last one, too. That's the harder one to answer. What do I think of fate? I'm assuming you mean, do I think it's real or not? And I'm kind of torn on that, and I'll explain. First of all, for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. The universe exists, therefore it had to have a catalyst. Therefore, everything that exists because of things set in motion by that catalyst. So, it could be argued that every event is a predetermined event, including the decisions we make. So that's kind of unnerving to most people, the idea that we're not in control of everything. But in addition to that, let's assume that we do have complete and utter control over everything. We're able to make decisions that influence the rest of our lives. Even with that, a person makes decisions unless they're crazy or irrational or dumb, really, really, really dumb. A person takes the information that they know, which includes their culture, their memories, and the things that they've learned, and then they take that information and they use it to gauge when a new situation arises what the best course of action is, and then they act accordingly. So a person always, unless they're crazy or stupid, they act in their best interests. They choose things that they want. There's a reason why when you go to a restaurant, they'll ask you whether you want steak or chicken and not steak or sewage or parasitic worms or razor blades embedded in an apple, because nobody would order those things. People act in their best interest. Well, that makes people predictable. It's really, if you watch a lot of people over a long span of time, it's not that different. And this is not me being misanthropic. I think people are great. But it's kind of like watching an ant farm, because those ants, they're not automatons. Every ant's an individual, but they're acting in their best interest, and it's predictable. Well, so do people. So, even if we have free will and fate does not exist, the options are a lot more limited than we tend to think. Like the things that the choices a person will make and the options that they have in a given situation are kind of limited. It's really those decisions adding up that affect a person's life. The small decisions have a snowball effect. But the small decisions, if they're based on what you know and what you've experienced, then that means that every decision you make is based on a previous event, which is based on a previous event, which is based on a previous event. um, kind of makes the whole free will thing a little choppy. So, I guess what I'm saying is that fate is a complicated thing, and if it exists, we wouldn't be able to really definitively prove it. And if it doesn't exist, given that we behave predictably, we wouldn't be a way to definitively disprove it either. So that's my opinion. Fate's pretty abstract. It kind of goes back into what I was talking about in a previous video about karma. I mean, karma functions almost identically to that. You are your past. You are your previous actions. You are your environment. And therefore, when you make a decision, you make a decision based on those factors. So I'm not saying it's all set in stone. I'm just saying it's not this infinite array of possibilities, and the world's our oyster, I guess. Hope that doesn't come across as negative. It's kind of nice knowing that, as rational as an individual thinks they are, everybody else is kind of behaving in the same way. Everybody else is just behaving in what they think, big important word there, is in their best interest in a given scenario. That's all I got right now. Thanks for watching. See you guys later. Doo-doo.